Welcome to another episode of Stories Lost. This week we go to the middle of Sweden and Lake Vikern. A lake that looks like any other lake in central Sweden, but that's only on the surface. The thing that makes Lake Vikern different from other lakes is that there are very high levels of mercury in the fish and sediment, indicating that rocket fuel, among other things, has been produced near its northeastern shore. It was the Swedish genius chemist and industrialist Alfred Nobel's company, Nitro Nobel, that had its factory here. A factory that in its heyday employed more than 1,000 men and women. Little did anyone know that the factory, established in 1915, would be the scene of a very curious incident over 60 years later. A mysterious event in the winter of 1976, which, despite the existence of physical evidence, remains a mystery to this day. But let's start at the beginning. It's 9 in the evening on Wednesday, January 21st, when Allan begins his 3-night shift at the Nitro Nobel factory. For 10 years, he has monitored the operation of a denotation plant for acids and made regular inspection rounds around the entire plant. For the magazine UFO Information No. 2, 1976, Allan retells his account of events. "I am very familiar with the place and notice immediately if something unusual happens. Sometimes we see, for example, test firings with flash grenades from the nearby weapons factory, which means that I am also familiar with these phenomena." The evening in question, after his second inspection round of the factory, Allan sits down in the coffee room overlooking the nearby Lake Vikern. At 10:25 p.m., he puts his gloves back on to go out for his third round of the evening. The previous 2 rounds were uneventful, so he expects nothing different this time. So he closes the door behind him and sets off. Even though the temperature is nearly 16 degrees below 0 Celsius, he doesn't feel cold. That day there is no wind, and it is both still and cloudy, but when he turns the corner of the factory building, he immediately sees something strange. Far out on the frozen lake, he can see shining lights. Allan later tells the magazine reporters, "I wondered what it was because we had no moonlight that night, nor was it a reflection of the bright light that we have down by the fence. My first thought was that it was a large herd of animals, with their eyes shining, all standing out there on the ice." At this point in time, Allan moves closer to the fence that encloses the whole factory area to get a better look. He tells reporters, "I studied this line of light in detail while getting the feeling of being watched. I was now about 100 meters away from the lights. As I adjusted my eyes to the new vantage point, a very large dark object appeared standing on the ice. It resembled a giant cheese or a round snuff box, but with slightly rounded edges. The height of the object I perceived as a maximum of 120 centimeters, and its diameter to about 35 meters. Along the entire top of the object, Allan sees 12 to 15 square openings. From these openings, which he estimated to be about 30 centimeters in size, it emits an unusual yellowish-white glow that is not reflected on the ice. I kept repeating to myself what it was I was seeing out there on the ice. At the same time, I had my work to do. I didn't dare call anyone and tell them what I saw. I was afraid of being laughed at, especially if it turned out that I had seen something wrong. I decided to keep quiet and keep what I saw to myself." Therefore, Allan continues his third inspection round, without any further action on his part regarding the light on the lake. However, it was not something that he was able to put out of his mind. Over the next few hours, he steps out of his office for inspection on average 3 times an hour to look at the object, and it remains in the same place. Even the light from it remains unchanged. The last time he sees it is just after 3 in the morning on January 22nd. When he goes out at 4, the whole lake is dark and the object is gone. When the morning comes, and with the shift change, he keeps quiet about his observation during the night. On the next 2 nights, January 22nd and 23rd, when he makes his inspection rounds, he sees nothing on the ice, and he becomes more and more certain that his imagination had played tricks on him. His decision not to tell seems to him to be an increasingly good one. After 2 days off, on January 26th, he goes on an afternoon shift. Just before 1 in the afternoon, he walks down the hill from the parking lot to his workplace. When he looks out again at the lake in the direction of the place where he saw the lights a few nights ago, he stops. Suddenly, the sightings he had made earlier no longer seemed like fantasies. Out on the lake, he sees a large and strange ring on the ice. Now he feels he can't keep quiet any longer, and immediately goes to some superiors and tells them about the impression of a ring on the ice and what he had seen a few nights ago. To his surprise, they take his information very seriously and immediately go out on the ice to take a look. Allan himself stays on land. He describes it himself as, "Something about going out there makes me uncomfortable." Word of the ring on the ice spreads like wildfire through the factory and the neighboring small community. Suddenly it's big news, and people flock from all over to see the strange phenomenon for themselves. Allan's own son, who also works at the factory, is one of the many to go out on the ice. But it is only days later that he learns of the observation his father had done during one of his night shifts, through the newspaper. The imprint in the ice was very large. It was circular and measured 40 meters in diameter. Most remarkable was the area in the center of the circle, where the ice had transformed into giant, thin ice crystals standing on end. The size of the crystals closest to the center was about 15 centimeters, while the crystals became finer the further from the center. At the far end, they were only 3 to 4 centimeters high, and outside the print, the ice thickness was 42 centimeters, while in the center, it was only 26 centimeters. No one has been able to provide a proper explanation for the imprint. The most widespread theory is that methane gas came up from the bottom and created the ring. This may well be the case, but that does not explain Allan's observation, because even if the ring itself is quite strange and unusual, it is the connection between the ring and Allan's observation that makes this case something out of the ordinary. That and the fact that he actually observes the phenomenon for so long. Since much depends on Allan and whether he really saw what he claims to have seen, we must ask ourselves how credible he is as a witness. On this point, however, there is a lot to be said in Allan's favor. The manager of the factory, a Mr. Sven Rossell, said the following: "I don't think he was in any way exaggerating what he had been through. He was a level-headed and nice guy, a good worker and well-behaved. But I think he suffered a lot for what he had experienced." His daughter said at one point, "Dad never talked to us about what happened. He didn't want to say anything about it. He believed what he had seen and found it very unpleasant. I think it scared him." The fact that his own son, who worked in the same factory, found out about his father's observation by reading it in the newspaper says a lot about Allan's down-to-earth modesty. Initially, he also wanted to remain anonymous at all costs, but after a journalist wrote a 2-page report with his picture and name under the headline, "I saw an unknown circular craft land in the middle of the night," his anonymity was gone, and Allan was furious with the journalist for revealing his identity. We can therefore say with some certainty that if the ring on the lake had never appeared, he would probably not have told us about his observations. The fact that the factory he worked at had collaborations with the defense industry and Swedish arms exports at the same time as there was a Cold War in the world were probably factors that made him finally feel compelled to tell superiors. What was it that he saw out there on the ice that January night over 50 years ago? Allan never got an answer to that question. He died in 1993, and we will probably never get an answer to that question either. All we know is that Allan had an experience he probably would have preferred not to have had, and attention he did not want. He thus joins the ranks of involuntary witnesses whose lives have been changed, often for the worse, by their experiences. Perhaps Allan himself sums it up best when on January 31st, 1976, he writes a summary of the event, concluding, "Was it a landing site for a spacecraft? Was it a spacecraft that I observed? I want to believe it was not. I dwell and dwell on it, but I get no definite theory. Only doubts about the whole thing." Thanks for watching Stories Lost, and thank you for all the great feedback I get on my episodes. This week I want to give a special thanks to Lee Goddard, Z, Someone, Stephen Ward Anderson, and Blue JM. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you also want to support the channel, see the link in the episode description. See you next week.